Hi guys, thank you for joining us. We tried so hard to go live, both on Instagram and Facebook, but for some reason it didn't work. So clearly that wasn't meant to happen. So we're going to send you guys the recorded one. As I mentioned on the posts, that obviously through this last couple of months, and we are based in UK, especially for the last 3 weeks, we should say, that coronavirus just took over our world, our life, in every way possible. And obviously this is, we don't need to know what it is, so I have no word to explain exactly what that is. So we all trying to figure out, we all trying to adjust, we all trying to do our best and trying to adopt and trying to stay strong. To be fair, that's all we can do. I took my time for the past probably 6 or 7 days, maybe even longer, spend significant amount of my time to call people individually, have a conversation with them and trying to support them, see if there's anything I can do, how they feel, because it's quite difficult times and we really do need each other. So we would think like in media, the majority of the thing, which is totally understandable, it's all about, you know, people lost their job, some businesses closed, unfortunately, and people do struggle to, because kids are at home, so parents do struggle to work from home, have the kids at home, and there's so many other things. But what actually got my attention, and for me, maybe people talk about it, but not in my circle, not in my network, so I haven't heard anyone talking about it. One thing really got my attention over and over and over again when I did one-to-one conversation. A lot of people have different kind of fears, which is associated with some phobias. And that wasn't anything that is people share on social media or the actual media is talking about, but it's like, it's really deep level kind of like fear. And the more I was talking to them, and I was like, wow, this is a lot. This is not just a case of like, I wonder if I'm going to have a job or how I'm going to pay my mortgage. The reason I got Adam Cox. He's a friend of mine. I work with him as well. So he's one of the best. I trust him 100%. His opinion in every way. I know he's definitely one of the best. And he is Phobia group, so I will introduce him properly to you guys. But straight away I thought about Adam. The reason is that, for example, like when it comes to the phobia, first I couldn't figure out what it was, and then I have a phobia of spiders. Adam knows that, so he's going to use his magic on me at some point. But like I have a phobia of spiders, so in my head, when people have, and we talk about with Adam as well, like fear of death especially was keep coming up. So for me, like I was trying to figure out what would that feel like. It would feel like there's a door, and behind that I know it's packed with spiders and creepy crawlers and everything that I'm so scared of, and I know that door can open anytime, and I have to live with that door. So I know I've got vivid imagination, but for me, that level of fear must be equivalent to some of the people. Maybe you might be watching that, you might be going, so my heart goes out for all of you, because I don't know how to cope with that, how to deal with that. So I reached out to Adam. Like I said, he's the best at what he does. He is a holistic therapist, is a phobia guru, so he specializes at all types of phobias and fears. And then I said to him, Adam, like, we need to have a conversation, and I need your help, I need your guidance, and let's talk to our audience and see what we can say, and is there any tips or tools you have? So welcome, Adam. That was a really long-winded hello, but I'm very looking forward to this conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Dilara.
Yeah, so I think we talk with you that offline about this, and then you have sent me the kind of the list of the things that would come up with this. So there are a few of them, but I think the biggest one at the moment is coming up for people. I'm not going to try to pronounce the proper one, so feel free if you can do it. but I'm just going to say, like, what is that? So the main one is fear of death. We have fear of germs, and then we have being trapped or enclosed, and then we have the irrational fear of hospitals. Then we have fear of crowds and lots of people. So there are a few other ones, but they are the main ones. So the main one that I would like to talk with you is this fear of death. So fear of death is not about us, but fear of death of the loved one as well. So I think so many people are struggling with that. So Adam, what, from your point of view, what's going on out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that this is very unusual times in the sense that it's not unusual for people to get sick in winter. You know, people get coughs, people get colds. Occasionally, people might get something more serious like a flu. So that's completely understandable. That's completely natural. And there are people that really don't do well when they're sick. We're in a different circumstance now. And the reason why we're in a different circumstance is that we've got a virus that the world hasn't seen before. You know, 3-4 months ago, this didn't exist. So in a very short period of time, you've got something with very severe symptoms, genuinely is killing people, that we're clearly not prepared for. And the global media, not even just the UK media, is talking about the coronavirus nonstop. Now, not only that they're talking about it, but they're enforcing certain behaviors that we're not used to that are very disruptive. You can't go outside, you can't do certain things. And that naturally and quite rightly creates anxiety. And I think the useful part of anxiety is that it helps people prepare. Now, we've seen exaggerations of people preparing not necessarily in the most useful way. They're buying things that maybe aren't so essential. You know, toilet roll being the thing that, you know, many a meme has been created about that kind of stuff. But effectively, it comes from a place of anxiety, and people want to reduce anxiety by taking some of the control back. So the fear of death, and you know, the term is thanatophobia. Anyone that saw Avengers probably saw, you know, the evil villain Thanos, and Thanos is Latin for death, effectively. So that's where thanatophobia comes from. But effectively, there is and it's useful to kind of explain that there is a distinction between a phobia and a fear. A fear is something that causes anxiety. So the fear is normally the stimulus, and then the symptoms we would label anxiety. And a fear of death is a very useful fear for all of us to have. If we were completely fearless and completely not bothered about dying, it would encourage reckless behavior. We would cross roads without looking. We would, you know, climb to the edge of buildings that aren't very safe. So having a healthy, respectful fear of death is actually very useful. Thanatophobia is very different. Thanatophobia is where you've got recurring compulsive thoughts about death fairly frequently that link with high levels of anxiety.
Mhm.
Now, what makes things a phobia rather than just a general fear is that they come about not of your choosing. So if you did some research about the coronavirus and you were, let's say, in your 70s or 80s, and you figured out that you're in a high risk category, having that healthy fear may change your behavior. So you go out less, you know, you wash your hands more. That's a very sensible approach. That's a healthy fear. If, however, you had recurring thoughts about dying and the hopelessness or misery that you might attach to that, and there's always different emotions attached, then that's a horrible experience because it's high levels of anxiety, and it's crucially, it's unconscious. It's not of your choosing. You don't choose the thoughts, and you don't choose the biological response. Nobody chooses to have their heart beating out of their chest, to have that kind of knotted feeling in their stomach. Sometimes the shakes, the crying, you know, all of that adrenaline going through the blood, which is activated by the sympathetic nervous system. Nobody chooses that. Whereas if you did some research about certain viruses or certain things, and then you felt a bit of anxiety, but it influenced your choices, that's not a phobia because you're choosing to kind of interpret it that way, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does very much. So I have a few questions for you. So that could be a bit of a mixture of phobia and fear. So please just do feel free, because I know that you can actually comment about fear as well, even though you're specialized about phobia. So so I've got some questions that I wanted to ask you. The first thing, where does the fear of death tend to stem from?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. The fear of death normally comes from the death of a loved one. Um, and that can happen at any age. I've worked with clients that, it first kind of dawned on them of their own mortality, maybe when they were quite young and maybe a grandparent died. And then it kind of dawns on them that there's going to reach a point where they're not alive anymore. And depending on how that is processed, particularly if they're a child or a young adult, that could be very much, excuse me, that can be processed in an overwhelmingly distraught way. And how phobias are normally created, they're normally created either by modeling or learning the reaction of family members around. So it could be a parent or a grandparent. If you witness them being absolutely devastated, maybe by the loss of their parent, then you associate that this is a really bad thing. And you get different cultures. Some cultures will celebrate the passing of a loved one in a really positive, celebratory way. But in certain cultures or certain individuals, it's a very, negative, and there's lots of emotions attached. So you might learn it from modeling from someone else, or it might come from a sensitizing event. And when it comes from a sensitizing event, you can't learn a fear of death by dying. So therefore it has to be, the death of someone else. And that can create this feeling. What leads from that, though, is recurring thoughts. And the other ingredient for a phobia is a trigger. So with your fear of spiders, for example, if you see a spider, that would then create an unconscious reaction.
Oh, it just makes, honestly, it just makes me want to just like run away right now.
That's it. You're not choosing to feel that way, but you feel that way anyway. So with someone with thanatophobia, seeing news reports of death, and it could be a famous death, or it could be an accident. It might be you're driving on a motorway and you see a crash and it's evident that someone's died in a car crash. All these things become triggers for this kind of feeling, but it doesn't even need to be that. I've worked with some clients where they just entertain the idea of that at some point they're going to die. There was one recent client that I worked with, and he would have voices in his head reminding him, several times an hour, that he's going to be dead, he's going to be rotting in the ground, his life is meaningless, and all this kind of stuff. How do you live that way if you're having recurring thoughts about death and severe anxiety that goes with it? And that's the other key distinction between standard fear and a phobia. The levels of anxiety tend to be very high. So in therapy, we have a framework of a scale of 1 to 10. So when I'm working with clients, a useful framework is that anxiety between 1 and 5, we can say that is discomfort. So for example, if there might be lots of people watching the news and thinking, well, I don't really like this idea that, even if it's a 1%, 2% chance of death if they got the coronavirus, that's not a favorable thought. But it's uncomfortable, but they can deal with it. So that might be a 1 to 5 level. If it's, let's say, 6 or 7 or 8, that's anxiety. The body starts doing things at that point which is not useful. And it might be tightened muscles or tension in the neck or fidgeting or twitching and things like that. And we can call that anxiety. If it's a level 9 or 10, a useful label for that severity of anxiety is panic. So some people watching may have had a panic attack. They know how, intense that is. It literally feels like you could die at that point. And what can happen is an interesting loop where the ideas about death create anxiety. Then the body starts doing something like the heart beating faster, which they can label as them having a heart attack, which makes them feel like they could die, which then increases anxiety, and they get caught in a loop. And it's difficult to escape that loop, because what strengthens neural pathways is the emotional intensity attached to them. And anxiety, if you've got high levels of anxiety, that can then make those neural pathways exist, which means the behavior becomes automatic, and that's where it becomes really, really debilitating.
Okay. We are going to, well, you will, not me, going to give hopefully some tips and tools and something that they can they can apply. But I just really want to go through this list because these are the actual questions rather than mine. For me, these are more important. So are there specific experiences from our childhood that could have enhanced our fear? I think this is what you already have mentioned, that it depends on the culture if they have experience. Is that right?
It totally is. And also, there are some deaths of family members where there is advance notice. You know, it might be that there is an elderly relative, everyone knows they're sick. They might have had a few scares going into hospital, and then eventually they pass. And that's kind of, everyone sees it coming, but there can be very unexpected deaths. And if the unexpected death is when no one sees it coming, it's of someone relatively young or healthy, and then suddenly out of nowhere they die, well, that can lead an individual to question their own mortality. And they could say, well, at any point I could die. And then, you know, that would be the equivalent of you know, wondering if there's a spider behind every book and every, you know.
Why would you even say that, man? Come on.
but but but
What the friends?
I'm using it to demonstrate a point, and that is that, you know, for people with arachnophobia, in your case, you tend to get more spiders in September, and you tend to get more spiders in gardens and attics and things like that. So naturally, what tends to happen with an arachnophobe is they avoid those places. Now there are, you know, there's a very famous quote by Mark Twain, and he said the two certainties in life are death and taxes. So at some point we're all going to die, and some of us accept that, but we don't think about death, you know, 100 times a day. But if you were thinking about death 100 times a day, and you had real severe anxiety linked to those thoughts, that could make your life an absolute misery. And then the irony there is that, you know, we are all going to die at some point. So therefore, having a quality life before we die is a very useful thing. But if the thought of death, recurring thoughts about death, then leads to horrible anxiety and, you know, this kind of paranoia and compulsive behavior, then you don't even get to enjoy the quality of your life before the death, which is, you know, a horrible tragedy in many ways. So it is one of the worst phobias to have.
It is almost like you die not even twice, pretty much every day, like every time you think about it. Because before that you actually experience the death, you're already feeling like you're experiencing it. And obviously with what we're going through right now, that it is possible for all of us. So I guess that as humanity, we have never been in an experience in a situation like this before, apart from obviously in war, which apart from our grandparents or soldiers, nobody has have an experience like that. So I think it's just the impact of it that we all can experience that at any given time. We can find out any of our loved ones, and that reality is obviously, it's a constant thing, and it is probably triggering this phobia. Like obviously it's bringing that phobia, which they already have, like you say, and then also it's creating such significant amount of anxiety for a lot of people. So there's another question here: how to manage the fear so it doesn't take over our mind and make us overthink?
Yeah, it's a really good thing. And again, this is fine if it's a fear and not become a phobia. When it becomes a phobia, you know, that's already, you know, no one that has a phobia is choosing to think about those things, you know, and that's why the trigger tends to cause it. So the reason why phobics seek help from someone like me rather than just kind of doing the classic tactic of avoidance is sometimes the world means that strategy is no longer avoidable. So for example, if you have a fear of flying, well, you know, in many ways you can avoid that. But if you're forced to fly to go to a family event or something like that, then suddenly avoidance is no longer an option. Same if you have a fear of public speaking. If by getting a promotion, the only, you know, the additional responsibility of that promotion is that you have to speak to bigger audiences, well, then suddenly the world is getting in the way of your fear. My key concern here with what's happening with the coronavirus is that there are lots of changes to people's lives, which mean that their traditional coping strategies might not be viable. You know, so that, for example, if you have a You know, if someone really doesn't like being stuck in a room for a long period of time, well, in everyday life, they can take regular walks, they can be out and they can interact and all those kind of things. But under lockdown, well, suddenly the government is saying you're allowed out of your house for maybe half an hour for a bit of exercise and go for essential shopping. But outside of that, you are locked in your home, lockdown. Now, for someone like that doesn't have claustrophobia or any of those fears, it's completely fine.
For
Um,
someone like me, there's a lot of introverts and there's a lot of people so used to working on their own. For me, like everybody's freaking out now, which I have so much respect. This is my normal lifestyle in a way, not in that extreme, but for me, it has zero effect to staying. So, but like you say, for some people, it's like they really been pushed against, like their limits been pushed through big
yeah,
time.
totally. And you know, it's unavoidable no matter how long it lasts for. It's an unavoidable, and that can increase anxiety because normally, you know, as people, we have choices and we can choose to avoid the thing that make us feel bad, and we can do more of the things that make us feel good. But some of those doors have been closed, which prevent that. So, you know, in terms of reducing anxiety or fear levels, if it isn't at the stage of a phobia where it's happening unconsciously and it's just a level of anxiety related to what's happening in the world, there are a few things that you can do to reduce that fear. And
Mhm.
one of them is accepting that there are certain variables that you're not in control of, you know, and that's fine. You know, the acceptance is a key element of that, because trying to control variables that you can't control can actually increase anxiety and increase a feeling of kind of overwhelm. You know, not there's no one individual here that can control whether or not the coronavirus, you know, increases or decreases. You know, we do that as a society. So it's accepting that there are certain variables completely outside of your control, but then knowing that there are certain variables within your control. So, you know, the choice of whether you read regular news reports or not, that is a choice of the individual. And if they know that when they hear stories of people dying or, you know, getting infected and things like that, and that makes them feel really anxious and fearful, well, then know that that wouldn't happen without that news article. So immediately, just by reducing the amount of the stimulus or triggers that someone's experiencing, that can massively reduce anxiety. The second thing is they can focus on what they are doing. So if they are regularly washing their hands, if they are keeping themselves inside, if they are having that kind of all this kind of advice, which is, you know, verified by, you know, very, you know, well-trained medical people, they're saying like keep the distance, you know, do certain things. Well, all those kind of things are going to help reduce the anxiety, because then there is a feeling of being in control in a situation where there is normally a lack of control. So I would say overall, it's accepting that there are variables you can't control, control what you can control, monitor what is causing anxiety and reduce the stimulus if possible. And I think the final thing is that anxiety are symptoms, they're biological symptoms. And normally, to feel anxious, you've got to breathe fairly rapidly. You've got to forget to breathe out sometimes. You know, to have a panic attack, you know, you've got to create a lot of tension. And the key thing is, it's virtually impossible to have a prolonged panic attack if you've got slow outward breaths. So one of the key things, if someone really is feeling overwhelmed and they feel like, you know, panic might come along, I would say focus on long outwards breaths that, you know, kind of open up the diaphragm. And what you're going to find is that that could take a level 7 or 8 or 9 anxiety and knock it down 3 or 4 levels. So it becomes still undesirable, but it becomes manageable. And the final thing I would say about encountering severe anxiety is appreciate that it will only ever be temporary. And a question that I use to interrupt the pattern of a lot of my clients that, you know, have severe phobic, severe anxiety, I ask them a question. I say, when did you last die of anxiety? And then the answer is, well, never. So you're telling me that every time anxiety's tried to battle you, you've won every single time. And they're like, oh, yeah, I have. Suddenly it means that they've gone from a position of being a victim. And if you think of the phrase panic attack, it implies there is an attack on a victim. So, you know, that kind of disempowers people. But if you, you know, change and reframe that so they feel like, well, every time panic comes along or every time anxiety comes along, they're the ones that defeat it because they don't stay in that state of anxiety. That's a nice reminder that it is temporary, and therefore there's always going to be a light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Adam. This next question is actually, like, I thought about it first time the other night. I mean, I used to think about it a lot when I was so much younger, but first time it came up actually 2 nights ago. How to mentally prepare for losing someone if you think it's likely to happen soon, or even when it's not likely to happen soon. I think that with the a lot of news around that, which we don't need to go to too much detail, because we already know that now people in this situation, that they have to make a choice of which age group they're going to treat. Because a country like Italy, when I watched the news at what happened and the decision they made based on the elderly, I literally burst in tears, because straight away I started to think about my mom. And even like with you, I told you this before. I said, I can handle anything. Like anything happens to my mom, that I'm going to need you, we need to prepare me, because that's something that I don't think how much resilience, how much mindset, how much, things that I get. I don't know if I can ever be prepared for that. But I guess that it's not the case of being prepared, but we can shift our mindset, maybe some thought process. So what would be your suggestions on this one, Adam?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. First of all, it is accepting that there are more vulnerable groups, and if a loved one falls in one of those vulnerable groups, then it is worth, one of the key things that can make a bereavement much more uncomfortable and much more sad is if there is a feeling of unfinished business. So, sometimes people carry grudges, people, they wish they would have said things, but they never say them. That can lead to guilt, that can lead to lots of other emotions. So I would say, look, it's better to say what needs to be said and they survive, than if unfortunately they do die and you wish you would have said that. Well, you can't go back in time at that point, so it's still better to tie up any loose ends, resolve any unfinished business, because the worst that can happen is that you have a better relationship with someone that is still alive anyway. Now, for some people that, don't have any unresolved issues, well, then there is a fear of loss, and that loss is the love that they feel.
Yeah.
So, from that perspective, it may happen, let's say there are going to be thousands upon thousands of people, particularly in those vulnerable age groups, that die perhaps younger than they would. Okay. And the key thing is, we're all going to die of something. And it may be that because of a horrible virus, someone dies, a few years earlier than they should. And I think accepting that death does happen to all of us, but therefore it's the quality of the life and the quality of the relationship first. That's a nice way to kind of frame it, to manage your own expectations. Where people get caught in a loop where they might not manage their own expectations is if they have an element of denial about the mortality of everyone and say, no, it won't happen to my dad, it won't happen to my grandparents, it won't happen. Well, the truth is it could happen. And I think saying, well, it could happen, and therefore I'm gonna, see if that person needs any help. I'm gonna have regular conversations. Do what you can to, so that if something horrible does happen, well, you've done the very best that you could, and that's going to reduce any likelihood of, guilt or anything that may come from that.
Yeah. Well, my 2 cents would be for this, which I did after that. I feel actually like I try to, we all trying, right? Psychology, mindset, NLP, hypnotherapy, it's all about reframing things and breaking, like interrupting the pattern, and help people to think in different ways. So for me, when I felt that level of anxiety and thinking, oh my God, so like this is real. It's more real. I don't know if there's such a thing as a more real. Like suddenly everything has just become so real. So for me, I just sit down and I said to myself, do you know what? I still have a chance to say everything I want to say. You know, I might just get a little bit emotional. Sorry about that. I'm literally, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm just literally telling my mom I love her every single day. And I think that's all we can do. Sorry, Adam. I think it's like, that's what I can understand. A lot of people going through a lot of things. It's for me, like, for example, I don't sit down and think about it every day. I never think about it. Like, that's the moment that it hit. And then, but it hit so hard. And then I think it's like, I now I turn it into gratitude and thinking, at least she didn't die suddenly. I mean, hopefully she's not going to die. So it's like, God forbid. So maybe it's just, I shouldn't even talk about it. But I think we all get into this mindset, maybe once, maybe twice, whatever. For some people, they could be there all time. So for me, that when I think about it, okay, I'm not going to live with this fear where it's going to affect the quality of the time, the conversations that I'm having with my mother. So instead of what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that I'm very intentional of every conversation. I will call her every day. I make sure every conversation ends with, I tell her everything I feel, and I always tell her I love her, you know, and it has been helping. And I think you're right. I think it's like death it's something for some people. And there's a question here, she asked the same thing. It's very interesting. She's like, why do some people think about, why do some people have a fear of death and others do not? And very linked to that, why do some people grieve much harder than others? I think you have answered this to, with before. But I like positivity. Still like have this positive approach, but I wanted to talk to you about this deep and intense stuff because we can't deny this. So many people go through with this, and again, guys, like, I'm really like, I'm working on my mindset as well. My way of choosing with this is humor. So I'm looking for the humor of everything and positivity of everything. But I think one thing that we need to be aware, doesn't mean that we have to sit down and worry and be anxious about it. This is going to create a lot of mental issues and well-being issues in the long term. And I want to start to have these conversations now, because we don't know what's going to happen. But I think you and me, we both know this. Trauma doesn't have to be a massive thing. Even a shock, even the news, that could stay as a trauma in the body. So I think the more conversations we have about this, and it needs to be, for me at least, it needs to be as open as possible. I do think that that's going to help people much more in the longer term, because obviously there's almost like you become a two sides of it. Some people, and there's no right or wrong, I always said this, everybody going to deal with this the way that they're going to deal with, including myself. So it's not like somebody is going to deal with it right and then the other one person is wrong. But I think we need to talk about this for people who doesn't have any opportunity to be able to talk, and we can talk about it, be positive and see the gift and everything else, but then we don't know what's happening close the doors, behind the doors for these people. And then they might think that it's not okay for them to grieve, it's not okay them to feel that fear. So that's what this is what the main reason that I want to talk to you, because I know you are as passionate about this as I am. So the last question that she has before we move on to quickly for the other ones, she's like, how do you accept that you will never see someone again, or they won't be able to share in your future milestones? Sorry, Adam, I feel like I just really put you in stuff with this.
No, it's fine. I mean, before I answer that question, it is worth saying, and you're right about trauma, and I think there are beliefs that if a traumatic thing happens, that it's going to scar someone and ruin their entire life. And I think there is so much evidence that the most catastrophically bad things that can happen to people, such as death, such as, it could be rape, it could be, horrible things, people can get through them. And they can resolve that trauma so they don't have to carry it around forever. And I know firsthand that people with the most severe phobias, they can have a future where that phobia doesn't exist. So first of all, you know, even if you've got intense, I mean, I know myself in my late teens, early 20s, I had such severe anxiety, I couldn't even leave. You know, right now people are being told not to leave, you know, their homes. I couldn't leave my home at that point. I had such severe anxiety. So the key thing is people can change, they can get through it. In terms of accepting there is going to be a future without someone that they love in it, well, I mean, this is what the process, the psychological process of bereavement is. And it's not easy. It really isn't easy, because those feelings are still there. There are reminders, you know, wherever you go, might be certain places, certain photos, whatever it might be, those reminders are going to be there. But the process of going through, and there, you know, there are grief specialists out there, so that if people have lost a loved one, there is a proven structured process to actually get to a point where they arrive at some kind of reconciliation, where they accept that there was wonderful memories in the past, that they might not have new ones in the future, but they can reach a point of acceptance and move on with their life. Not And moving on with their life doesn't mean that that diminishes the importance of the value of the person before it, but that they found a way to reconcile the two, if that makes sense. And again, you know, the sad but real thing about all of us is that, you know, we have all lost people in our lives, and we will do, because we're humans. And you know, when I work with people with thanatophobia, the way in which I really create a long-term change is I get them thinking about the meaningless of immortality. What would immortality really mean? Well, there'd be no reason to wake up. You know, there'd be no reason to do anything. Deadline's time has no meaning at that point. And actually, the good thing about being mortal is that, you know, it gives value to life. And there are people that waste their entire life. They waste their life doing meaningless things with meaningless people, and they have no goals or whatever they want to do. And how I really get them changing is that the idea that at some point we're not going to be around, that encourages them to do the kind of things that you've been doing with your mum, to create those moments. It encourages them to pursue their dreams, because what would be more tragic than dying after a full, well-lived life is having a full life and realizing that you didn't do any of the things you really wanted to do. You didn't create those memories, those moments. And that's really what I'm using. I'm using the thought of death to put fire in their belly and fuel in the tank, rather than to create a feeling of meaningless. And that's really how you create the change.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. Shall we quickly talk about the fear of germs? So these people must be having probably the hardest time ever.
Yeah, and this is an interesting thing,
I
because
can't even imagine what they must be going through right now.
it's a horrible phobia. Mysophobia, so MYSO, mysophobia, not fear of rodents. That's musophobia, MUSO phobia. Mysophobia is fear of germs, fear of infections. And I've worked with a few people with this fear, and they tend to have very good visual memories. They literally have got the capacity to almost kind of like imagine germs still being touched on something. So there was a guy that I worked with, and there was a well-intentioned therapist that he worked with before me that thought, I know what I'll do. He forced this, and he was a teenager. He forced this teenager to go to the toilet, not allow him to wash his hands, and then touch all of his favorite toys. Now, years later, he could still tell you exactly what toys in the room he had touched without washing his hands. So a lot of people with mysophobia do have like the equivalent of photographic memories. They create internal pictures very, very well. But effectively, it comes from this idea that infections travel. Now, my biggest concern about the coronavirus is that you've got children, you've got people of all ages being told that you can't touch people, that you have to create distance from people. Well, I mean that if you needed the ideal ingredients to create a phobia, it's high levels of anxiety and huge amounts of social proof. Now, if the entire world is social distancing, staying in their homes, and you link that with huge amounts of anxiety, well, those neural pathways will still exist in the brain months after the actual virus is kind of, we've built an immunity to it, or it has less impact, because those thought processes will still be there. And there will be people 2 years from now still wearing the masks. There will be people 3 years from now reluctant to shake hands with people.
Yeah.
There will be people that, right now, people are cleaning their hands, maybe twice an hour, sanitizer gel. They'll be doing that, not from a position of protection and, oh, this is a hygienic thing to do, but from a place of, they're going to wash their hands because that's what's going to make the anxiety go away. And with people with the fear of germs, or a phobia of germs, this mysophobia, it's linked to obsessive compulsive disorder, because the anxiety levels are so high that what makes the fear go away and the anxiety reduce is a coping strategy such as cleaning. So you've got high levels of anxiety, you wash your hands and the anxiety goes down, and that then rewards that behavior. So it creates these compulsions, and people with this phobia, in many ways, are bizarrely well prepared for the actual situation that we're in at the moment, because they've spent a whole lifetime of cleaning their hands, of having distance with people, of evaluating risk. This is almost their moment, but there's lots of people.
This is almost their moment.
I mean, they've been preparing.
Sorry, I just like the way you just.
But the nature of a phobia is all phobias make sense in a given context. So, there probably was a time when there was lots of very, very dangerous poisonous spiders, in which case your reaction to a spider was completely legitimate and fair and rational. It's just that there isn't that many dangerous spiders now, and that's why it feels a bit irrational and out of place. In the same way that in the right context, the possibility of highly infectious germs that our bodies aren't prepared for, that reaction is completely rational, and a lot of the behavior, 2 years ago, if we saw half the street wearing masks, and keeping distance, we'd think, right, what kind of parallel universe have we entered? But now it's been legitimized because that's the guidance that we're being given. To a mysophobia, they've been very used to this, and my concern is that long after the coronavirus is not really a thing anymore, people will still have the same thought patterns and kind of coping strategies, because the idea that infections could be on anywhere, and we're hearing advice that this virus could exist on plastic or metal for up to 4 days. Okay, so the thought process of a mysophobia is that whenever they touch something, it could be infected with germs. Someone with mysophobia, they can't just leave the bathroom if it means touching a handle. They try and open it with their elbows, or they wait for someone to come through the door and they rush through it. They've already got these coping mechanisms because they don't want to touch the thing that could be infected. So it is genuinely a horrible phobia, but it can be fixed. And mainly you break the thought pattern between the possibility of infection and the likely outcome, because right now it's appropriate, but normal times, what we're seeing now is highly inappropriate behavior and not necessary.
Thank you, Adam. Do you think that is going to link to, or maybe even increase fear of crowds? I'm not going to say the fear names, guys. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. Adam will do that for all of us. Fear of crowds and the lots of people. And the reason I say that, I don't have fear of germs, but I have OCD. And the interesting thing is, like now, like my mom, my cousin, they say, okay, you should do that, you should clean that. I was like, only 6 months ago, you all were like, excuse my French, but taking the piss out of me, saying now, why did I have the, antibacterial wipes, and I was cleaning the, what you call it, the light switches and like, everything else. And I was like, I was a joking matter. I was like, oh, she's the OCD, she's clean. And now you're telling me to do that. But the interesting thing is, the other day I had to go to the chemist to get some prescription. And also, like for me, I'm one of those people that, I smile, I like being around people. You know, I'm very comfortable around people, and like when I went to chemists, like you could feel the minute I walked in, you could feel the stress and anxiety, Adam. We were all 2 meters or a meter, 2 meters, you know, distance. First time ever, I put like mask in my face, and then I had the gloves. It was really weird and uncomfortable, first of all. So I was trying to like get my head around it. Oh my God, is this the current life right now? And then somebody came in, and then he went the other way, and he got slightly close. I swear, Adam, everybody jumped, and I was like, "Oh my God, this doesn't look too good." So while we were talking about, you know, fear of germs, I just start to think about it. Probably that's gonna cause, or maybe for the people that have already got fear of crowds and lots of people, maybe they're having a great time of their life, maybe. But do you think that it is going to create some things around that, because people literally jumping on the street?
Yeah, it certainly could do. And this is how phobias are created, when you've got anxiety to the idea. Now, right now, all we're hearing nonstop in every form of media is stay away from people.
Yeah.
Okay. Because being around people means you could get infected.
Yeah.
And right now, the idea of, and you've probably spent time on busy, you know, tubes and trains where literally you're touching other people, you know, you've got other people's faces like a few inches away from you. Right now, the thought of that would create high levels of anxiety, because you're thinking maybe someone in there is infected with something.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is, and this is how phobias are created. Now, in, let's say, 6 months time, when there is no lockdown and the social distancing guidelines have kind of been relaxed, well, there's still going to be some people that still have those neural pathways where they associate someone coughing, someone breathing, you know, someone being close by with the possibility of infection. And that same kind of reaction that you saw, you know, in that chemist where everyone's kind of a bit on edge, there'll be people 6 months from now, 12 months from now, still with that emotion, because they've still got those neural pathways where they're connecting people with germs, with infections, with risk. And that's the overriding issue that we can kind of see from this kind of stuff. And it's understandable. Those people that naturally have been, you know, avoiding crowds and busy places for a long time, again, like this is a perfect time for them, because they're like, well, I've been training for this my whole life. But
Probably they're the ones like 3 times or 4 times then borrowing everyone's dogs. You know, they're the one going all the time. It's like, oh my God, this is the definition of heaven. This is my ideal life. Sorry, guys. I mean, we have to see the human side of it as well.
Totally. But the key thing is everything has a context. You know, if you know, I don't have a fear of spiders, but I wouldn't pick up a unknown spider in a rainforest. That would be risky, you know. So the where you've got healthy fears are where you can accurately evaluate risk and make sensible decisions in according to that. But we're humans, and humans have this kind of survival instinct where we evaluate things sometimes at an unconscious level, and then that creates a biochemical response, sometimes labeled anxiety, that makes us more attentive, concentrate more, quicker decisions, or more resourceful if you've got lots of adrenaline. And I can really genuinely see, you know, right now, for example, if you broke your leg, or let's say you twisted your ankle, the kind of thing where you could choose to go to a hospital or not. Right now, you probably wouldn't go to a hospital. So this fear of hospitals, this phobia of hospitals, there are some people that, you know, partly and quite often is linked to mysophobia, because they think, well, that's where all the infections are, that's where all the germs are. Some people have a fear of doctors, this latrophobia. So you've got this kind of all these different kind of fears and phobias right now. Anyone would be quite right to avoid hospitals, because you're seeing news reports of doctors dying, healthy doctors are dying. So therefore, when you create a belief or a thought linked to a consequence, that can be the root cause of a phobia. And then sometimes it's someone like me, sometimes months, sometimes years afterwards, that have to kind of go back in time and then unpick where that original thought come from, the point of inception, to make it more useful.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm in the same boat, but I'm always going to find the humor. But Adam, probably your business is going to boom from this. You're going to help a lot of people because, you know, it is going to bring a lot of things and a lot of people. The question I have, the last question probably, or one of the last one, being trapped or enclosed. So when people stuck at home right now, and also like we need to consider the fact that some people have 2-3 bedroom houses, some people have a child and a partner, and then they're in a studio flat, and then they have to work, both partners, and a child, and it's just a studio flat. And that, like, just the thought of, even for me, that would be quite claustrophobic. But people actually who struggle with that, this is the reality, because we don't know how people's life, you know, their house, and what the impact is making for these people. What would you say for these people, and what would be your recommendation, Adam?
Yeah, well, I mean, when people think of claustrophobia, they think of someone being stuck in a box, or trapped under trapped in a lift, or stuck under a staircase or something like that. So very small confined spaces, and that's certainly true. I've worked with people that they felt claustrophobia on a train if the train stops in between stops, because
Wow.
there's a feeling that they can't get out.
Mhm.
And it's the feeling that you can't get out is really the root cause of claustrophobia, not the size.
Mhm.
That's the thing. So if someone's in a lift and it's moving, they're kind of fine, but if it was to stop in between floors, they would freak out because there's a feeling that they are trapped at that point.
Mhm.
Right now, the government guidelines mean that we, in theory, should be out of our homes less than a category A prisoner, murderers.
I never put that in that
Yeah.
perspective.
So the key thing is, if you're, let's say, a low-level prisoner, you're going to spend a certain amount of time in your cell, but outside of that, you're in the canteen speaking to other people. You're in the yard. You might be doing some exercise. You might have a basic job to do, but you're out and about. Right now, for those people that are in studio flats, one-bedroom flats, they have less rights in many ways than murderers and rapists, with less exercise time. And this is government advice, where you're seeing stories of potential police and being fined. And realistically, if you're living in a bedsit or a one-bedroom flat, you don't have £1,000 to pay for a fine. So then there's even more feeling of being trapped and confined.
Yeah.
And it's the feeling that it's a weird thing. If voluntarily you just spent a whole day in your apartment watching nonstop Netflix and kind of going on social media, well, nobody has anxiety with that because it's their choice.
Mhm.
But if someone was doing that, and then someone locked all the doors, all the windows, and then even if they didn't want to come out, they weren't allowed to come out, suddenly
Yeah.
the anxiety would be very high. So it is about the option being reduced.
Mhm.
So there are people that absolutely don't mind being in their own place. There are people fortunate enough to have quite big
Wait,
places.
okay.
So, if they're getting a lot of stress in one room, they can go to another room. Maybe they've got a garden. But we're living in the UK at the moment. There are more people living in apartments than ever before. There
Yeah.
are more people living alone than ever before.
Yeah.
So you've got certain trends that have taken place. The price of property has meant that the average amount of space that the average person has got smaller and smaller. So, if this would have happened 30 years ago, well, most people then were living in houses rather than apartments. Not really a big deal, because you can just stretch your legs in the garden or whatever you want to do. It's different now because so many people are in smaller apartments, and some of these small apartments are very expensive apartments, but it's the
Yeah.
physical size, and it's the restriction as to what you can do. That's going to
Mhm.
increase anxiety for them. If they
Yeah.
are in that apartment with someone else, when people are anxious, they don't tend to be so resourceful. All that adrenaline, all that cortisol doesn't make them communicate the best. So you can expect more arguments, more, frustration. It
Mhm.
might be that parents are shouting at their kids or their partner or whatever it might be, because they have this feeling of being trapped. And if you were trapped in a room and it was locked, you'd be screaming and shouting to get out and all this kind of stuff. That's how these people naturally, that don't cope very well. And it's not necessarily the case that they have a phobia. of it, because you've always got levels lower. So the phobics are the extreme example, but you might have people that they don't cope very well being on a plane because they know that they have to be sat in a seat with a seatbelt and they can't get out of that chair for a certain period of time. And a lot of people that, you know, are kind of shamed or sometimes even arrested on planes, it's because they're using alcohol to cope with anxiety, to experience. And a lot of the time it's not fear of flying, it's claustrophobia. It's the fact that they're not allowed to move. So what I'm also expecting is that addiction rates are going to go up, because when people have anxiety, there's different coping mechanisms. And in my experience, the number one coping mechanism for anxiety is avoidance. But if the world doesn't let you avoid it anymore, then the next thing is self-medication. And that self-medication is going to be alcohol, it's going to be food, it's going to be prescription or non-prescription drugs. These are going to be the coping things.
Netflix
as well. You know, I mean, that's an addiction as well.
Yeah.
I was in the media earlier this year, and it seems very trivial now, but I mean, the people are going to be addicted to these things in the same way that someone with a fear of germs will obsessively wash their hands. Someone with certain anxieties, well, if having a drink of alcohol or eating temporarily reduces the anxiety, well, that's how addictions are formed, because they're being positively rewarded for the new behavior. And then it becomes a cycle. Those neural pathways get there, it happens automatic. And then it's very tricky to, if you don't know what you're doing, to break from habitual behavior. And it can be an addiction if there are addictive properties in that substance as well. So, you know, it's, and a lot of people have said this, but they said that there could be more damage from a mental health, from a financial point of view, from an economical point of view, to humans, not from the virus itself, but to the changes that are taking place because of what we're doing to deal with the virus. And I think it's a very valid and genuine point.
Yeah, it does feel like pretty much all of us being really stretched to our limits in ways, you know, I mean, obviously, I do reframe it. I see this as a massive opportunity for growth in different ways. But I think when it comes to the phobias and this level of high fears, it would be very difficult to explain to people, you know, oh, actually, you can see the growth on that when that person is all they think is like, is the bathrooms clean? Is the I don't know, like the fridge is clean, or is somebody I love gonna die? So it's like all day, every day. So there's a lot of things that people have to deal with it. They never had to deal with it day to day, like you said before. So it's very, very unusual times. Yes, you know, people will adapt, but I think certain things that I don't think a lot of people, we weren't wired to adapt all this. So there's a lot of things is gonna come out for this. There's a lot of amazing and positive things gonna come out of this. But for people like yourself, like myself, a lot of therapists, and so many people doing amazing work, there's so much work for us to support these people during this time, as well as ourselves. So Adam, so all these people we identified and we talk about it, and thank you so much. You really reflected, made excellent points. I think you made a lot of people, including myself, realize that what could be possibility if we carry on the way we are, or to think the way that we are thinking right now. But what would be the things that you would suggest people? Obviously, they might need some professional conversations and things like that. But while this is happening, can you just give them some advice, maybe how they can cope? What would be helpful for them?
Yes, it's a good point. And I would echo your point that people are coming at this from different perspectives. You know, you've got a very impressive library behind you. You know, you've done a lot of work to kind of look at these things from different kind of perspectives, to invest time in yourself. The average person hasn't done that. You know, they've not worked on themselves. They're not kind of prepared for change. They don't handle change very well. So you know, it's very important that we don't assume that just because we're coping very well that everyone else is coping very well, and certainly they're not. You know, I've seen people freak out just because, their favorite thing isn't in the supermarket or something like that. So, people's tolerance for change isn't very high anyway. And then we've got more change than we've ever seen ever. I think the first bit of advice I would say is that this is temporary. The idea, and of course things are going to be different. People are talking about paradigm shifts and kind of evolution and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, in 1918, the pandemic, the Spanish flu killed millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
And life moved on. And throughout time, there has been epidemics, pandemics, and we've adjusted and we've kind of improved on certain levels, but it's never like that forever. So first of all, remember, this is temporary, and it can feel overwhelming right now because we're in the middle of it, but it will pass. And I think that's a useful framework. Secondly, there are opportunities within everything, and I would say, I'm a big fan of going out of the comfort zone to build resilience, to build mental strength. And you could consider this to be almost kind of like weight training for your mind. You've got huge amounts of uncertainty, huge amounts of change, and what I think anyone watching this is going to learn is you're tougher than you think you are. You're going to be able to handle this, and it's going to be, stressful, and there will be anxiety, but the fact that you can handle this, and I came up with a business idea, and I'll share this because it's highly relevant to this. People talk about stress, and they talk about stress and they say, right, how do people handle stress? They handle stress by going on a holiday, having a massage, going to a spa. And I came up with an idea for something I called stress camp. And basically, you give people a weekend of misery. You shout at them, you give them tasks, you don't give them enough resources to get it done. And the whole point being that when they return to normality, suddenly they've got the ability to handle things. And when their boss is shouting at them, giving them a deadline, it feels nothing compared to what they've already experienced.
Yeah.
Well, just imagine that this corona crisis is like stress camp for you. Huge amounts of uncertainty, huge amounts of anxiety, huge amounts of stress, huge amounts of pressure. And if you can handle this, what can't you handle? And if you frame it in that way, then actually this is an opportunity to be mentally tougher than you've ever been before. And that's the key thing where I can see if people frame it in that way, it could empower them rather than make them a victim. And the key thing is people are not strong unless they have challenges and adversity. So this is a challenge, this is adversity, and it has the ability to make us stronger if we choose to perceive it in that way. If we choose to perceive it that, I'm a victim, all these things are happening to me, I can't pay my rent, I can't do this. Well, great, this is the perfect excuse, but that will weaken you. And meanwhile, there's other people looking at this as their own version of stress camp, and they're going to come out the other side much stronger.
Yeah. Do you know the last part of it? I think you said that's almost like identical to things that I say. I think it just shows. And guys, like if you're watching that, I'm not referring that we're better or worse. It's just I think when you really work on your mindset, you get to that place, but it takes time. Like I could never be able to think that way, even like 3 years ago. So it's okay wherever you are. It's totally okay if you're struggling, if you're thinking that this is just happening for you. The interesting thing is that the whole thing is like, this is happening for me. It really doesn't apply this because it's happening to all of us. If any time in the whole humanity that we all been together, we all in something together, this is the case because we see Prime Minister, look, he caught it. He's not resilient to it. He can't deal with it. So we're all in this together. So, but I echo what you say so many times. And for me, this is my 5 cents, 2 cents. I just suddenly said 5 cents, 10 cents, 2 cents for you guys. That for me, the way that my not coping mechanism, but the way that I reframe everything, which is really helping me right now. I'm in this side of it bridge right now. So this whole thing, this pandemic, this virus, whatever people want to call it, awakening for some people, opportunities, labels, whatever you would like to say, there's a bridge here. So this is where we are. and we're going to cross that bridge, no doubt about it. You know, this too shall pass. But I made a very clear intention that the person I'm going to be other side of that bridge is going to be stronger than me right now, more resilient, gentler, kinder, more compassionate, more understanding. And I literally just set myself a vision, the person I want to be when this ends. So everything I do, I'm working towards that. So when I have the bad news, like I said, I cried here as well, but I allow myself to feel that. But I don't let that thing live with me, sit with me. I don't like, I take a day, you know, or what I do, this is something that I shared with my clients as well. If it comes to it, if you're really struggling, give yourself 30 minutes every day, if that's what you want. For some people, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you want. 30 days to watch the news, to really get upset about it. Maybe you cry, maybe anxiety, but then when that 30 minutes is complete, that's it. That just stays at that moment. And then the question is, what can you do with your time on that day? Because the biggest thing is that, you know, they say something is like makes you or breaks you. I made a very conscious decision that this thing is going to make me. This is not about, oh, you know, about business or about this, nothing like that. As me, who I am, you know, like the person I am when nobody is around, you know? And I'm really focusing on her right now. I'm showing her a lot of love, a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy. But in the same time, I keep saying to myself, hey, do you see the opportunity? This is amazing. Are you going to step up, or are you going to stay in the same place? Are you going to actually, when this is all over, who do you want to be? How do you want to behave? When you look back, how do you want to see yourself deal with? So there's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of things, but at the same time, I think the biggest thing is like, let yourselves feel the feelings, whatever. You know, there's so much pain is going on. Allow that people, the feelings come and go. That's the biggest thing. You know, feelings are not here to stay. You know this better than anybody, probably, Adam. You know, the feelings come, but they're not here to stay unless we hold on to it. Like, just let them come and go through you. If you want to cry, if you're overwhelmed with something, you know, let yourself, let yourself cry, let yourself get upset, but don't go to the same source of what made you upset, you know? So make a conscious decision. So there's so many different things that we can do, but I really do hope that this conversation with Adam, and Adam, I'm so grateful for you. Like, you help a lot. You help a lot from, you know, to me, even just like from this. And there's so many things you help me to see in a different way that I realized I wasn't seeing it that way. And I really do hope that this is going to be beneficial for you guys. What I do, I already tag, you know, we're going to share this one on Facebook, Instagram, and I probably, because now it's Zoom, I can put it on my YouTube channel as well. So on YouTube, I will actually put Adam's website as well. So connect with Adam, reach out to him, reach out to me, ask any questions that you guys have. We really are in this together. Like, this was a cliche word, but I think these words never meant more meaning. Adam, would you like to say, you know, something else before we say goodbye?
Just one final thing. You know, obviously, thank you again for inviting me to have this chat with you. The one final thing I would say is that the human mind cannot experience conflicting emotions simultaneously. So the more things that you do to make you feel grateful, the more things you do to make you feel happy, connected, all these things, fear cannot exist, anxiety cannot exist while you're simultaneously feeling really grateful or happy or playful or all these other things, and that's within your control. So the more of those things that you can do, then the more you can reduce anxiety and obviously cope much better with whatever you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate your time. This has been amazing. Thank you.
More than welcome. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.